Hello, everyone. Hello. Welcome to the new MDs, moms, doctors, and scientists working together to heal our children. My name is Zen Honeycutt. I am the founder of Moms Across America, also the author of the book Unstoppable. And with us today, we have Dr. Michelle Perro as the pediatrician and doctor, and she's the author of What's Making Our Children Sick. Great book. And you have a new book coming out. We want to hear more about that soon. And Dr. Stephanie Seneff, one of her books as well is The Toxic Legacy, how the weed killer glyphosate is destroying our health and the environment. Welcome, Dr. Stephanie Seneff and Dr. Michelle Perro.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thanks.
I'm so glad that we're here today to talk about a very disturbing but important issue, and that is dementia and Alzheimer's. Nearly every family is touched in America today by dementia, which is a general term for cognitive decline, which includes Alzheimer's. And Dr. Perro and Dr. Stephanie Seneff will be talking a lot today about, we'll be just sort of unraveling what is going on with Alzheimer's in the world today, and especially in America, which is where we are stationed out of. But this issue is impacting people all around the world. The prevalence of Alzheimer's and other dementias in the United States is an estimated 6.7 million Americans aged 65 or older and are living with Alzheimer's and dementia in 2023. 73% are age 75 or older. 27% are younger. And of the total US population, 1 out of 9 people age 65 and older has Alzheimer's dementia. So that is a very high rate. And 33% of people age 85 and older have Alzheimer's dementia. That's a very high rate. And about 200,000 in Americans have younger onset dementia. So this is happening to people who are anywhere from 30 to 65, 64 years old. That's younger onset dementia. And the numbers are growing, unfortunately. These are numbers according to the US Census Bureau and the Chicago Health and Aging Project. That's called CHAP. And we are seeing these numbers go higher and higher. It's very concerning. Personally, I'm going to tell a personal story about this before we dive into the issue with Dr. Stephanie Seneff and Dr. Michelle Perro. And that is that my amazing father, Paul Labossiere, was 91 years old. He was living on his own. He was divorced at the time, but he was living on his own. He was making his own meals. He was walking 1.5 miles a day. He was going up and down stairs in his apartment. He was very happy to be, cognitively aware and reading and keeping up with the news and, talking with neighbors and things like that. However, he received first it was the flu zone shot, which I advised he not get because of Dr. Mercola's articles, because it has 4 quadrivalents in it. And it's a quadrivalent shot, 4 different flu viruses. And he got that shot and he became dizzy and he had trouble walking. And he eventually, within about a week or 2, fell. And when he fell, he was taken to the clinic by his caregivers. And because of a scratch on his arm, they decided he needed the DTaP shot because of tetanus. Right. Mm-hmm. So they're thinking, right. Yeah. I see Dr. Perro. So they're saying, tetanus can get into cuts and wounds, which is really, if you can wash it out, you're not going to be getting, the chances of getting tetanus are very low. But they gave him a DTaP shot. And the first ingredient in that we later on learned is aluminum. And within 2 months, he had chronic kidney disease, chronic liver disease, COPD, emphysema, congestive heart failure, and he had to get open heart surgery when he was 91 years old within 2 months of getting these 2 shots. And I had an ER doctor review the information that he also had much more pronounced symptoms of dementia. He was, confused. He had trouble reading. He didn't even want to read magazines. Before that, he was an avid reader. And so we had an ER doctor, a 3rd generation ER doc, look over a whole year of his medical records. And she said that he did not have that internal organ damage before the vaccines. He did have that internal organ damage after the vaccines. And before, he only had, eyesight issues, hearing issues from the war. He was a World War II veteran, bad knees, old folks. But afterwards, he had all this internal organ damage and increased dementia. And so, of course, he was on 17 different medications after getting out of the hospital with open heart surgery. By the time he came to live with myself and my family, he was on 12 medications. We tested him, and his aluminum levels were 246 parts per billion of aluminum. Those are huge levels, are they not, Dr. Perro? Yeah,
Yeah.
2.5 is considered toxic. So we couldn't put him on a detox program at the time because he was on hospice, and they don't do like remediation sort of things under hospice. They only do have people feel more comfortable. But I put him on Fiji water every day, and Fiji water has an element in it called silica, which is natural because of the volcanic rocks and all of that. And Dr. Chris Exley talks a lot about this, how this particular type of water, and there are other waters as well that have silica in it, but you can't add it to it. It has to come naturally there's the 12 different brands of water. Some of them quite expensive. Some of them are in glass, which I prefer, but you can see those different brands. And what the silica does when it's found naturally in the water does draw out aluminum from the body. And we tested him a year later, and his levels had gone down to a 6. And at that time, even though he still had internal organ damage, he was reading Brief History in Time by Stephen Hawkins. He had read A Secret Life of Plants, which is a fascinating book. I highly suggest it, within 2 weeks before he died. So his cognitive ability was back, but the dementia was really very much remediated. But the internal organ damage, which we believe was connected to the ingredients, the aluminum in the vaccines, was really incredibly detrimental. I believe it killed him. So that's my personal connection, to dementia. And I do know that, and we'll talk about this during the show, he did eat a lot of food out of aluminum cans. We'll talk about dietary, exposure to aluminum. We'll talk about what else could be causing Alzheimer's. So, let's go ahead and get into that and talk about, first of all, Dr. Perro, can you address what is happening when somebody gets dementia? Is their brain synapses not connecting? Is the brain getting deteriorated? Is there swelling? What is going on when somebody gets dementia?
Yeah, let's talk dementia. I just want to say, like, this is the mother's, doctor's, scientist show, and you say, here's a mother talking as a daughter. But remember, moms are also part of the sandwich generation of taking care of the children and the elderly.
Yes.
So folks like Zen are playing a dual role, which is very stressful for those of us taking care of our parents and our children. So Zen, hats off to you for caring at both ends of the spectrum. We know you have 3 boys, and how difficult that really is, because what you just described about your dad is extremely difficult.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just wanted to acknowledge that, please. Yeah, so dementia is a broad terminology. It's more of a syndrome than a specific disease diagnosis. And there are qualities of dementia where people have communication issues, memory issues, and alterations of their daily living. Those are called activities of daily living, or ADL. Alzheimer's disease is a subset of that dementia, and it's the biggest component. A type of dementia is Alzheimer's disease, and about 60 to 80% of dementias are Alzheimer's, which compose all the factors I just mentioned, including it can have apathy, depression, aggression, and then basic loss of physiologic control, and then eventual death. And it's different years from the onset of Alzheimer's to death. It can vary from 3 to 5 years. Some people can live 20 years with Alzheimer's. Under the category of dementia, there are many other types of dementia, not as common, such as Lewy body dementia, frontal temporal lobe dementias. There are vascular dementias, and something which we may touch on at the end of this talk would be Jakob Creutzfeldt dementia, which is very rare and rising form of dementia. Save that to the end, big Broadway moment. So, and then there's some people who have mixed dementias. Because you have Alzheimer's doesn't mean you can't have the other dementias, like the vascular dementia or the frontal temporal lobe dementia. So does that explain it adequately for our listeners?
So those are the different types of dementia, but what's happening in the brain? What's occurring
Oh, yeah.
when someone
So,
gets
like,
dementia?
if you look at Alzheimer's, the most common one, then we have 2 types. We have accumulation of a protein, beta amyloid protein, and we also have, which is an abnormal protein that accumulates in the brain, and then we also have, a folding of those abnormal proteins, as well as tangles that begin to occur, these neurofibrillary tangles that begin to occur, and these events cause miscommunication between neurons, where the neurons can no longer talk to each other, communication disturbances. Those neurons are constantly firing to communicate to different parts of the brain. So it's a disease of this amyloid protein, this abnormal protein, in the brains of the individuals. And we can talk about that there are many factors that can trigger the development of these abnormal proteins called amyloid beta is the name of the proteins. And we'll get into it during the show with glyphosate, one of Stephanie, my favorite topics, and yours, and can trigger the production of these proteins, abnormal proteins. We can talk about the aluminum, and we can talk about genetics, but it's multifactorial. There are many neurotoxicants in the environment, with aluminum probably being the worst one for Alzheimer's, even though I've just read an article today that said no, aluminum doesn't cause Alzheimer's. But anyway, so it is those factors of the tangles and this beta amyloid creating changes in the brain structure and lack of neuronal communication.
Okay, and we'll get into how those are happening. Do we have an image about the brain swelling? I don't, maybe not right now.
Yeah, I didn't pull up that image. That's on me. We can put it up on our social media accounts if
Great.
people are
Okay,
interested in
great.
that.
We'll show people what's actually happening,
Yes.
what it looks like in the brain later. And so let's talk a little bit more about, is it aluminum in vaccines or other sources and other heavy metals that are causing or contributing to dementia? Stephanie, do you want to address this first, and then have Dr. Michelle Perro after that?
I think a lot of the minerals and metals are involved, and there's sort of imbalance sometimes between different minerals that play different roles, like zinc and copper. There can be imbalances. Minerals play a very important role in the brain, and you can get imbalances if you're taking too much of one and not getting enough of another. Strong deficiency in zinc, these things can drive those proteins towards misfolding. And I want to say about the amyloid beta. Amyloid beta comes from a protein that actually plays very important roles in the healthy brain. But that protein then gets disrupted by these processes that involve toxic exposures, including, of course, glyphosate and other toxic chemicals that we're surrounded by, as well as the toxic metals. Both of those together synergistically cause this protein to get into this form that misfolds. So it's changing from the alpha helices to the beta sheets. That's the critical thing that happens. The beta sheets are what then precipitate out as the plaque. And the research in Alzheimer's treatment has been focused. The pharmaceutical industry has spent most of their money in the last at least 10 years trying to develop drugs that can remove that plaque. They think there's that plaque, it's associated with the disease, let's get rid of it. They're focused on removing that plaque. And that, I think, is the wrong focus. And so one of the things I'm very concerned about is the drugs that they're coming up with and really promoting these days, very recently approved drugs, are targeted towards that plaque.
Can we get to the drugs in a minute? But did I misspeak? Did I say minerals? I meant aluminum. Can you address the aluminum? Because what I was seeing was aluminum contributing to my father's dementia,
no question about aluminum. And in fact, when people are put on dialysis, they discovered that aluminum causes dementia because people who were on dialysis were getting aluminum from the water, just naturally present in the dialysis water. And that was causing dementia in these people. And they finally have learned, when you do dialysis, you got to make sure there's no aluminum in the water in the dialysis treatment. That's really a very strong
link. And dialysis is for kidney dialysis?
Yeah, kidney dialysis.
So that was leading to, was there a study or something that?
Now, there's been very strong evidence of that in studies. We don't have anything here to show, but I'm aware of that. I've written about it.
Okay. And how is the aluminum contributing to Alzheimer's and dementia? What's happening there, Stephanie?
Well, it's a +3 charge atom that can't react with anything. So it's a very nasty metal. We have a lot of minerals that are very useful in our body, as you know. All these, micronutrients, the cobalt and the zinc and the calcium and potassium, all these minerals that are important and that are probably deficient in many cases. But the aluminum is a +3 cation, +3 charge, which is really strong positive charge, and it binds to the extracellular matrix, which is negatively charged, and it erases the negative charge. And that's one place where it starts to cause problems, because you need that negative charge, even in the vasculature, in order to have healthy blood circulation. So aluminum, and then it gets into the brain. There's tons of stuff about aluminum getting even into the nucleus. Everywhere it goes, it's causing trouble. It's just messing up the whole. The body hates aluminum. Aluminum has never been a mineral of any value to anybody, whereas all these other minerals, lead is like that too. Lead and aluminum have no role in biology. They're only toxic. And
mercury.
Lead, mercury, and aluminum.
Yeah, lead, mercury, and aluminum. And then there's another one too, arsenic.
And then jump back in there. This is so crucial, Stephanie. I just want to add one point. When Stephanie talked about that loss of charge, when neutralized and you lose your charge, that's called zeta potential.
Right. Exactly.
And there are those folks who have been vaccine concerned. That one of the reasons what makes vaccine so toxic is it diminishes the zeta potential, this charge in cells. We are electrophysiologic beings, and things that diminish our charge are harmful to our physiology. So I just want to throw that in there. And there are ways to remediate that. We can talk about at the end of the show. But Stephanie, sorry for interrupting, but I just wanted to hone in on that point.
Can I just ask though about the zeta potential? Is that measurable? Are people measuring people before and after getting vaccines and seeing a decline in that charge in the cells?
It's been done experimentally in studies that have been published on just looking at solutions and then measuring the zeta potential, putting the aluminum in there and finding the zeta potential goes crap. It becomes very low. It's a low negative charge rather than a high negative charge. That's really devastating for the blood. If you get aluminum in the blood, it's going to change the zeta potential. It's going to change the circulation. It's going to be really bad news.
And also what it does in addition, there was a physician named Dr. Andrew Molden. He was a Canadian physician. He died at a very young age in Canada, who was an outspoken critic about the zeta potential. And he wrote a lot about it. His material is hard to get. He's literally scrubbed off of YouTube. Maybe there's 1 or 2 left of him. And he was one of the, health practitioners who are concerned often get censored about this.
Yeah.
But Stephanie said,
surprise. Yeah.
Surprise. There is good data about that. And when you also lose your zeta potential, something else happens. Your red blood cells clump.
That's right.
So instead of this free-flowing movement of your red blood cells, which carry heme, iron, among other things, the red blood cells do a lot of things. They're not just little carriers of iron. They have an important role in immune function, et cetera. It's extremely important. They start to clump. And if you look at people's blood, it's called live blood analysis, you'll see this extensive clumping. And the red blood cells can't function appropriately. And that's a big problem, sludge.
Would that account for women reporting menstrual cycle issues and having like clots, the clumping?
Probably.
In their menstrual cycle?
It also could be caused by issues with platelet adhesion, platelet aggregation issues, endotheliitis.
But you see, and the red blood cells are negatively charged, so the aluminum just binds right to them, sticks to them, and messes them up.
We saw all of that after the COVID vaccine, a lot of menstrual issues, mostly heavy bleeding.
Yeah.
And for sure can affect coagulation via clumping or endotheliitis, inflammation of the vessels of the vasculature happen post COVID vaccine. It could just happen post spikeopathy, after spike from the infection, spike from the vaccine can cause that. So could it be related to aluminum? Absolutely. I have no doubt that it can be a link in there, but I didn't look into that with Stephanie. We're going to have to go look into that now.
I know, we prepared so well. We missed out some things.
I know.
And also aluminum is in the plaque. They look at the Alzheimer's plaque. There's aluminum there, so they know that it's got something to do with plaque. I think it causes that misfolding to happen of that protein because of the aluminum. That can trigger the misfolding. Among other things, can trigger it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And can you talk about how aluminum glyphosate binds to aluminum, or aluminum binds to glyphosate.
Yes.
And what is the connection there and how it brings it into the brain, as you mentioned earlier?
That's amazing, actually, and I've written a paper about that. Aluminum is +3 charge, and that makes it hard to get past the gut barrier. But glyphosate, 2 glyphosate molecules can wrap around an aluminum molecule and erase its charge. So it's a small uncharged particle that can easily cross through a leaky barrier. And then glyphosate induces a leaky gut barrier and a leaky brain barrier. And glyphosate will then grab onto the aluminum, the 2 of them together go through the membrane, through the barrier, get into the circulation, travel up to the brain, and even get past the brain barrier. And when they get into a positively charged situation, glyphosate will unload the aluminum. Now both of them are extremely toxic in the brain.
Glyphosate acts like a dump truck of aluminum into the brain.
Exactly.
Wow. And
it's
so when people are eating, so when people are eating glyphosate residue, laden food, very high levels, such as hummus and oats and chickpeas and beans and all types of grains, wheat and things like that, people don't know it. If you're not eating organic, you're eating very high levels of glyphosate. That glyphosate can then act as a dump truck, which can go through the blood-brain barrier. So really like a military dump truck, right? That can go through that barrier and bring the aluminum that's in the canned foods and in the vaccines and in the potato that's wrapped in aluminum is going to absorb aluminum, right? That's on the grill or in the oven, things like that. Can you talk a little bit, Michelle, about the exposure of aluminum through the diet as well?
Yeah, certainly. This is one of my favorite topics. It makes me a little bit nutty, this aluminum issue, because for several reasons. So if you look at children's hospitals' positions on vaccines, this is not, let's just be clear. We can talk about vaccines without being labeled anti this, pro that. We're giving kids 72 vaccines by the time they're 5. So why can't we talk about it? I can talk about Tylenol, but I can't talk about vaccine. Talk about it.
We need to talk about the ingredients. What we're talking about is the ingredients in vaccines.
Ingredients. Yeah. So the whole concept of vaccines may not be a bad idea. It's even a homeopathic kind of derivative. It's what's in the vaccine are these adjuvants. So aluminum stimulates the immune system. That should be a beautiful thing, except for what Stephanie just shared with us. But so CHOP, for example, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, says on their website, there's no difference whether you eat the aluminum or inject it. Same thing. Mm-hmm. No, I take issue with that. Couple of things about that. So we ingest aluminum. It's in our, as you mentioned, cans. It's in food. It's in wrappings. It's in the rainwater. Aluminum's in baking soda. It's in various like antacids and other medications people might be taking. Aluminum is found in our pots and our pans. Farberware is one, using an aluminum foil. It's naturally in the ground. It's a naturally occurring in the ground. So there is some natural aluminum in there. So it's ubiquitous, right? What we've learned since even preparing for this podcast today is that aluminum itself causes leaky gut. So aluminum induces intestinal permeability, and it affects those little zonules, those little border police that allow different substances to go in and out of your gut. So when you now have glyphosate affecting the brush border, that intestinal membrane, which is only 1 cell thick, you have aluminum causing leaky gut. So it enters the bloodstream. There's no barrier, this idea. So the aluminum damages the barrier. Aluminum also affects the microbiome. It causes dysbiosis. It decreases the beneficial bacteria, increasing the pathogenic bacteria. And there are some bacteria that can break down aluminum. There's certain lactobacilli that actually can break it down. And the aluminum can be affecting those beneficial bacteria as well. We know aluminum does it. We know mercury does it. So they affect the microbes. The microbes also use metals in their reactions, like lactobacilli use manganese, but maybe these metals are substituting or they're directly toxic to it. Thank you. So you can see it's coming just about from everywhere, and our kids are loaded. So now when you inject it, it's directly into the bloodstream. You have leaky gut, directly into the bloodstream. It's nicely carried by glyphosate. We're all exposed. There are 6 different ways that glyphosate shuttles it. And it's cumulative. So what CHOP said, Children's Hospital Philly said, it's just a little bit. It should be fine. We know that aluminum cannot be cleared, not easily. And we can talk about that at the end of the show, how to get it out of your brain.
Yeah, we have a question from Bonnie. What are some ways to detox the aluminum and glyphosate? We'll get to that, Bonnie.
We're going to get to that, Bonnie. Thank you. And so it's cumulative. So, and remember, children have impaired detoxification. Their PON1 system is abnormal. They don't have a robust microbiome. Their liver is not as sturdy in their detoxification. So children have a harder time clearing the aluminum than adults, and even adults are impaired. And then we have a cumulative effect. And we also know that dose doesn't make the poison, right? So a little bit can be toxic, certainly true for glyphosate. Mm-hmm. So this idea, well, it's just a little bit, and it won't hurt you. Not so true. And then we have this cumulative effect. We have found aluminum in Alzheimer's brains, in MS brains, and autistic brains loaded with aluminum. And we've seen it shine up. You could see it easily on electron microscopy.
And this was found in particular areas of the brains, right? And both in patients with Alzheimer's and children with autism, they had higher levels of aluminum in particular areas of the brain. So the correlation is really seen as causational now, isn't it? Could you argue that aluminum is causational of Alzheimer's?
I would definitely say so. I think the evidence is overwhelming.
I'd say, yeah, evidence is there. I mean, and papers. And when we went through the literature, Stephanie, and we're looking at our literature on aluminum and Alzheimer's, there are papers dating back 10 and 20 years. This is not new information. Yeah. Like, oh, we just discovered this. I'm looking at all the dates on these papers, 2013, 2010, 2006. So not new information. And
in fact, aluminum, I've heard that Alzheimer's didn't even really exist until the late 1800s when they started figuring out how to make pans out of aluminum. They learned how to pull the aluminum out of the mines. Once they started doing aluminum mining and then producing aluminum-based products, people started getting Alzheimer's back in the late 1800s.
Yeah, and Esther's asking, should I also avoid cooking in aluminum cookware and having drinks from aluminum cans?
Oh my God, I'm going to jump in and say yes. I recently switched my cookware yet again away from aluminum. I use Salad Masters now. No plug for Salad Masters, but I do love them. Get it out of your cookware. If you're cooking at it, and when you cook acidic foods, also can be pulling out the aluminum, and like tomato sauce and stuff. So like Farberware is the main one. A lot of people have Farberware. So invest in a good set and get rid of the aluminum foil. You can use parchment paper, and you can bake potatoes with some olive oil. You don't even need aluminum. We have to get away from our love affair with aluminum foil.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And Stephanie, you had a graph that you want to show about the connection with the spraying of glyphosate and the rates of senile dementia going up. Can you talk a little bit about this graph?
Yeah, I think this is amazing. And as you may know, Nancy Swanson was the one who started this game of looking at data from like hospital discharge data, available data on the web. Anybody can get this data, and looking at over time, and then looking at the levels of glyphosate being used on corn and soy crops, which you could also get easily from the web. And this was, Nancy created many plots that show dramatic increases in a whole list of diseases. And certainly autism is one that matches perfectly. And then Alzheimer's does too. This is senile dementia over time. This goes from 1979 on the left to 2009 on the right. And you can see the very big rise in glyphosate usage around 1995, 1997. It's been going up ever since. This is because of the GMO Roundup Ready crops in part, but then they learned how to use glyphosate as a desiccant before harvest. We've got glyphosate all over our food supply, and we've got increasing Alzheimer's every year, increasing dementia. And just like autism, going up really in step with autism, all three of them are going up together, the glyphosate usage, the autism, and the dementia. And I think that they're all tied together. And the people say correlation doesn't mean causation, but now we have evidence of causation. If we could put up that other new paper that came out, association between glyphosate exposure and cognitive function, depression, and neurological diseases in a representative sample of U.S. adults. So this is from the NHANES study over the period 2013 to 2014. They had data on glyphosate levels in the urine, and they correlated it with data on cognitive decline, depression, and other neurological diseases. They found a significant correlation, which is really, really amazing to me, that you could just look at glyphosate levels in the urine and find that that was an indicator of increased risk to cognitive decline. So I think the evidence is there. And I also am learning, I've been obsessed with studying exactly how glyphosate causes both autism and dementia. And I feel like we're making progress in understanding the science, which is very exciting to me.
Yeah, and I want to get more into the science about that, because what you have to say about that is fascinating, and it's going to take a little bit for us to wrap our heads around it. But I think with all of us, communicating it, we can. And but what I want to ask is, you just showed us a chart on glyphosate. You also talked about how glyphosate is like the dump truck of aluminum.
Aluminum, right.
Now, do you think, though, that if somebody doesn't have aluminum in their bodies, which would be very rare now, right, with the exposure that Michelle just talked about, with all the exposure to aluminum,
especially the vaccines,
the vaccines and cooking and different things like that. If somebody didn't have the aluminum in their body, would the glyphosate alone be contributing to this?
I think so. I think so. Yes.
Okay. So you think, so it's probably a twofold effect, glyphosate and aluminum. And if there's aluminum present in the body, the glyphosate is going to make the impact worse.
Both ways. Yeah. The aluminum makes the glyphosate worse. The glyphosate makes the aluminum worse. They work synergistically to cause increased harm, more than the sum of the two. They collaborate to cause harm.
Affects fetal development, affects neuronal signaling, neuronal
development.
So we know there are fetal cells, and it happens different generations out. That was out of paper out of University of Washington, which showed that affects subsequent generations, not just the present fetus.
Epigenetic,
So the glyphosate also increases the beta amyloid proteins. It causes increased cytokines and TNF alpha, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and you need that TNF alpha in your brain, but too much is not good and too little is no good. A lot of things, the brain's complicated, and you want certain things in balance. And glyphosate causes dysregulation of that TNF alpha, which causes activation of inflammatory pathways in the brain. The brain is on fire, it's inflamed. And calming that inflammation, first step is removing the causation. Glyphosate, aluminum. People should start there. You got to remove it.
So
I think they're number one, number two.
I just want to reiterate that glyphosate causes an imbalance of TNF alpha. Can you explain that a little bit more? And then leads to the inflammation in the brain. Can you say a little bit more about how that's happening?
I mean, I can say that because the TNF alpha is an inflammatory agent, and it shows up whenever you've got inflammation, which is a consequence of some kind of toxic exposure. And more TNF alpha is going to destroy the actual neurons. It's going to destroy them. And so that's a very simple, and glyphosate causes more.
Is it a product of glyphosate?
It's actually a product of the cells. The cells release TNF alpha under stress conditions. And people know to look for the levels of TNF alpha as a measure of inflammation. It's a clear marker of inflammatory response. And inflammation is what causes the brain swelling. Inflammation is a chronic condition in autism. The autistic kids have a chronically low-grade inflammation in their brain.
So you could measure somebody before and after exposure to glyphosate and see higher levels of TNF alpha.
Yes, they've done experiments like that.
Yeah.
There are published experiments that show that.
Okay. And then once you have high levels of TNF alpha, how is that contributing to dementia? Can you just reiterate that one more time?
Well, that's just the damage that's caused by the inflammatory response. Oh, here you go. So this is a good one right here. See, glyphosate infiltrates the brain and increases pro-inflammatory cytokine. See, it's a pro-inflammatory cytokine. Cytokine is a chemical that's released. It's a natural biological release from the cells in response to injury, to stress. And glyphosate stresses the mitochondria. I mean, it really causes mitochondrial damage, which is critical because the mitochondria are the energy supply for the cell.
So this is not funny, but my brain sort of made this funny for a second, but because I have been feeling for 11 years fighting Monsanto that Monsanto is making me crazy, but literally, like Monsanto makes glyphosate, which is literally making people crazy. It's affecting their brain, causing inflammation and leading to what people, dementia, what some people would call crazy. That's not a nice word for it. But Monsanto's products are leading to the cognitive decline of the entire American population, and people as young as 30 years old are starting to get dementia. So if you've ever questioned whether or not it's important to eat organic, I hope that this episode shows you that if you want to have good cognitive ability throughout your entire life, and most of us could live to 100 years old if we take care of ourselves and exercise and lift weights and eat good food, you don't have to be having dementia for decades, right? Starting at 30. If you are avoiding some of these things. So we're going to get into avoiding it. But first, let's talk about what Big Pharma wants us to take in order to treat the symptoms of dementia. Because of course they want to make a lot of money off of this, very prevalent issue right now. What is the new drug? Who wants to address this? Michelle, you want to talk about this new drug first, and then we'll go over to
Leqembi. Leqembi is the name.
First
Leqembi.
of all, I want to know who sits and invents these stupid names. It's, you know,
I know, with a Q without a U.
So this one is a monoclonal antibody that binds to amyloid beta protofibrils. It's one of those antibody drugs. It costs about $26,500 a year. Medicare has agreed to pay for it for most, but there are a lot of copays, and it's an infusion therapy, which means you have to get to an IV center. It works initially until it doesn't. I'm going to let Stephanie explain that in a minute. But initially you get an improvement and then a decline, but there's a significant side effects from this drug. And one of the side effects is brain swelling, so,
isn't that what you're trying to avoid?
Brain swelling is associated with Alzheimer's, with more severe dementia is associated with more severe brain swelling. So it's like, hello, right?
I'm reading about this new Alzheimer's drug, and these kind of monoclonal antibody drugs have been around for a while. This is the newest version of it. But once again, there are other cheap things we can do to help patients with Alzheimer's, but this, uber expensive experimental drug, yeah, here we go, pill for ill, drug-based pharmaceutical interventions. And we're not talking at all about diet, multivitamins. We have a study about how multivitamins improve cognition and stave off memory loss for 3 years in patients with dementia, Alzheimer's. So a multivitamin, you can get that at Costco, Smarty Pants.
That's a good clean one though. But I want to backtrack for 1 second. You said very expensive. We have a note here that the FDA's approval opens up Leqembi to a much wider population because Medicare said it would cover the $26,500 annual cost per person,
but not the copays.
Oh, so, still, that's going to raise insurance across the board.
Somebody on a fixed income having to pay that high copay. So not so fast. Those copays can be prohibitive on that drug, by the way. And then infusion costs, and I don't even know. It's just crazy making. We've created diseases, and then we're creating the drugs to treat them. This is the simple equation. We've created Alzheimer's, as Stephanie pointed out, with the introduction of aluminum smelting, and now we're trying to create it with a very expensive pharmaceutical drug. With the numbers you mentioned at the beginning of this show rising, this is a cash cow for industry.
And so people want hope, and the industry's been working so hard on this drug. They've been focused on this idea of antibodies to amyloid beta. They're like completely stuck on that. That's the only thing they're thinking of doing as far as treating Alzheimer's. And they've been developing these drugs for a long time. And they kept on getting really frustrated because they'd get a drug, it would do a great job of removing the amyloid beta, and then it wouldn't do a damn thing to help the Alzheimer's. It didn't improve their cognition. And they finally have this one. Yeah, so this is the really critical thing that really jumped out at me. Significant increase in lateral ventricular volume occurred in all drug groups. This is these drugs that are these antibodies. They bind to amyloid beta, and they make it actually easier for the cell to remove the amyloid beta by kind of shining a light on them in a way. Antibodies are a way for making it easier for the cell to recognize how to clear that protein. So basically, the situation is that these Alzheimer's brains have a problem with their ability to remove damaged goods. So they've got these cells that are getting inflamed. They're damaging, the proteins and whatnot. This protein gets misfolded, and then what you want to do is to send it through the lysosome and get rid of it. That's the digestive system of the cell. You want to just basically break it down, build it back, put it back into building blocks, and make new proteins out of those amino acids. That's what the cell is unable to do. That's why it accumulates in the plaque, because it can't be removed. And it can't be removed because the lysosomes are broken. And they're broken in part because of something called sulfatide, which is deficient. And this is something that I figured out back when I was working on my book, actually, Toxic Legacy. I had a whole section that I wanted to put into my book about sulfatide because I discovered a whole series of papers by Professor Hahn and his collaborators going back to the 1990s. And it was truly striking to me because they found that sulfatide deficiency, which is it's a sulfated lipid, it's the only sulfated lipid. Sulfatide deficiency was one of the earliest signs leading to dementia. Even almost before you had symptoms, you had sulfatide deficiency. So I think it's actually central. I think it's a central feature of dementia is a deficiency in sulfur
in a fat. Is that what you're saying by sulfated?
It's a sulfated fat. Yes, lipid is a fat. It's complicated. It's ceramide, and it's got this amino sugar, and then it's got this sulfate. And the sulfate is really important because sulfate makes these lipids water soluble. This is the whole thing with cholesterol sulfate. I've talked a lot about cholesterol sulfate. That's also deficient. I think all of this can trace back to glyphosate messing up sulfation pathways. I've been saying this with autism. I've been saying heparin sulfate with autism deficient in the brain. It's been shown in both in mouse studies and human studies. Okay. That's another sulfated molecule.
And what happens when glyphosate messes up the sulfation pathways? What
happens is sulfatide becomes deficient, and sulfatide is actually really, really important in the brain. It hangs out in the synapse and in the myelin sheath. Those are two places where sulfatide is concentrated in the brain. And the brain has a lot of sulfatide compared to the rest of the body. And so here we go. Adult onset central nervous system myelin sulfatide deficiency is sufficient to cause Alzheimer's disease like neuroinflammation and cognitive impairment. And so this guy, Xianlin Han, is the last author on this paper. And he's the one I've read all of his papers going back to he's still writing new papers recently. And his stuff is amazing. And he's been talking about this sulfatide deficiency in Alzheimer's and dementia since the 1990s, and nobody else is picking up on it. That's what's very frustrating to me. Nobody, except me. And I wanted to put it in my book, and they said, no, it's too obscure. People won't really appreciate it.
For 30 years, we've known why Alzheimer's is happening in people, and yet mainstream media, pharmaceutical companies, healthcare companies are not saying what we can do about this.
They're doing the wrong thing. They see that amyloid plaque. They say, oh my gosh, this is clearly there. So if we can just get rid of it, we'll solve it. That's not true. The plaque is actually more of a side effect than a cause, I think. I mean, the amyloid beta is a very important molecule. And when it misfolds, it gets removed. So there's actually a deficiency in the functioning molecule that caused the amyloid beta plaque. It's getting messed up by the aluminum, for example. And meanwhile, the cell can't break it down. So it has to be put somewhere. If you can't break down the garbage, you got to store it, right? You don't have a garbage truck to take it away. You're going to have to put it somewhere. So they're going to pile up the garbage outside the cell. They pile up the amyloid plaque wherever they can because they can't get rid of it because they don't have enough sulfatide. Sulfatide is actually taken away in order to break down the plaque.
By that drug, Stephanie.
That drug is going to encourage the removal of sulfatide, which is why it causes the brain swelling, because sulfatide is also linked to brain swelling. When you have a low sulfatide, you get brain swelling. So the drug is actually helping to clear that plaque. It's actually not the plaque. It's the soluble fibrils that precede the plaque just before they're going to precipitate out. That's what this drug attacks. That's actually different from the previous. The previous drugs actually attack the plaque, antibodies to the plaque, whereas this is antibodies to the fibrils before they become plaque, which makes it very easy then for the cell to put them through the lysosome. But then the cell's got to get sulfatide to do that. So it grabs the sulfatide from the outside, strips it away from the myelin sheath. And now the cell is worse off than it was before because it's lost the little sulfatide that it has is getting chewed up by the process of breaking down those antibody labeled amyloid beta, fibrils. So you're getting an increased rate of loss of sulfatide as a consequence of taking this drug, and you feel better only because you've been removing the plaque. It's kind of making the cell sort of thinks it's doing better because the plaque's going away, but it doesn't quite realize the reason is because of the drug, And so the cell behaves a little better for a while, but then eventually you're in much worse shape than you were before because you've lost all that sulfatide.
Now, that's an important point and 1 second, Michelle. So that's an important point. You feel better for a little while, like you do with a lot of mental illness drugs or maybe thyroid drugs or something like that. But then you're dependent on that drug and you're declining. And so they give you more of those drugs or more other drugs with more side effects. Is that what you foresee?
Yeah, I think you're just going to really collapse. I predict that these people are not going to do well in the long term. They may get a couple months of a little more clarity, and then it's going to be really bad because their sulfatide is going to be so low that they won't be able to function anymore. That's what I'm predicting. It's not going to do well at all in the long term.
Okay.
And what they'll say is they died of their disease anyway, but this is also synonymous with ADHD treatment. It's a depletion. Those drugs that we use in ADHD deplete the synaptic endings of the neurotransmitters. And then when kids come off them, and adults, we now treat adults with these same drugs, sympathomimetics, they're called stimulants, stimulant drugs, people crash off the medication. We depleted them. So this is not the way we should be going in terms of these sulfatides. And also, thanks to Stephanie, I'm now aware of sulfatides, and I wasn't before. I sure am now, because I've been down the sulfatide rabbit hole. It's involved with cancer and vascular injury and all other parts of your body. You need these sulfated fats. And remember, one of the ways we help people with Alzheimer's disease and other dementias with omega-3s. Fats. Yes. Maybe you can replete some of these fats that are lost. EPAs, essential fatty acids, DHA. They come often from fish oils. For vegetarians, we can use algae-based fats, algae omegas, they're called. For vegetarians, and vegans who don't want to take fish oil. And also, let's not forget our friend coconut oil. That's a medium chain triglyceride that can get into the brain and help restore some of these fats.
Let me say a couple of things about those, because the polyunsaturated fatty acids, when they're depleted, you actually have also, sulfatide gets degraded faster when those are depleted. So you want to make sure to have plenty of those. Coconut oil is really interesting, because that's a mid-chain fatty acid, middle length. The fatty acids can be very short and mid-length and then very long. Coconut oil is in that sweet spot of being a medium chain, and it gets sulfated in the gut and transported directly to the liver with a sulfate attached to it. So it's delivering sulfate to the liver, which I think is very valuable for the liver, because the liver makes most of the body's sulfatide, and it can use the sulfate that's delivered by the coconut oil. It can use that sulfate to make the sulfatide.
So coconut oil could be beneficial in preventing, or perhaps
preventing Alzheimer's and treating dementia too. I would recommend. There's a whole book that I have on that.
It's a treatment, and it's like a tablespoon a day. I put it in a teaspoon in my coffee every day of coconut oil. I personally take it because, and it's also can be used topically. You absorb it. It has anti-infective qualities. It's an amazing substance, organic.
I've used it for oil pulling in your teeth.
You can use oil. It pulls toxins. It's antimicrobial. It's systemically absorbed. Your skin's a great absorptive mechanism. Even for the elderly, if they're having trouble ingesting it, you can put it in the elderly. Elderly have very thin skin. It's going to be systemically absorbed. So there's so many ways that, and because we were dealing with a question earlier, what can we do? Well, these healthy fats. We need fat. We're carbohydrate rich, fat poor. We need less carbs in our diet, more healthy, non-rancid fats.
Okay. Let's get into it. Are we ready now to get into more of the detoxing? We have about a little more than 10 minutes left of the show.
I think so. We should, yes.
You think so? Okay.
I think people
need, and we've hit upon a number of things already, so that's good. But
So, but to summarize it, if you want to summarize it, what I'm hearing is that this new medication that they're promoting for dementia and Alzheimer's is actually going to be contributing to the problem. And so
I think so.
This episode right now is Big Pharma's like worst nightmare for Alzheimer's. So if you have people in your life, right, that you want to, have them improve over time and stay improving, not just improve and then decline rapidly and then die from this tragic disease, and lose the relationship and connection and the memories that you have with them, right? That is what we love the most about living, is being connected with our loved ones and being able to share memories with them. And what happens when they have dementia and Alzheimer's is that they begin to forget about those things. And so it's really like you are losing your loved one while they're alive. And it's incredibly tragic and sad, and can be very disturbing for family relationships. So if you want somebody in your life that is facing, symptoms of dementia, or to prevent or avoid this, you want to make sure that they're aware of that these new drugs could be possibly misleading in their claims. Surprise, surprise, yes. And that there are other things that they can do to avoid or support. Can we reverse dementia? First of all, can we ask that? Can we improve? I mean, we did with my father. So I'm wondering, is that something that you see regularly? Can we reverse symptoms of dementia?
I would hope so. I think it is a matter of nutrition.
Earlier is better, always. Whatever illness you have, whatever dis-ease you have, the earlier you intervene, the better. Before something becomes so progressive down the road, it's harder to reverse it. But a lot of these things are reversible, depending the body is lacking the nutrients it needs for repair. You have to do a lot of restoration. And it takes somebody who's really knowledgeable in neurodegenerative diseases to help the individual, because it's there's not one bullet that's going to change the course. It takes a holistic lifestyle intervention overhaul, and supplements and their different types are a huge part of it. Here's a simple one written by my colleague Tori Hudson about multivitamins staved off memory loss for 3 years in a big study with over, like, there was 3,500 patients and adults. And it was a placebo study, those receiving multivitamins and those not. And the people who received just a multivitamin, nothing fancy, did much better. It staved off memory loss for 3 years. That's significant, because with memory loss being a key element of dementias, and it's what's most distressing for individuals and families, their short-term memory loss. They can remember often long-term, but not short-term. So
and I will say there's actually B12, cobalamin B12, because I remember a talk given by a nurse, could it be B12? And she's written a book about this, that when you have a B12 deficiency, you can have symptoms of dementia. And if you fix that deficiency, they go away.
And you can fix it by taking a methylated B vitamin, B12
cobalamin
vitamin every day. Yes, I do that. And I do that also because I have a mutated MTHFR gene, which is connected with that methylation, and you need to have that. A lot of people that have troubles detoxing, we're talking about detoxing now, aluminum and glyphosate out of our bodies, might want to get your genetic SNPs checked and see if you have that mutation of that gene, and you may need to be taking B complex vitamins in order to support your body to function properly. Yes, Michelle.
Let's talk about that MTHFR, because a lot of times now OBGYNs would order that for a lot of women, because women who have these genetic SNPs often miscarry. But now there's some insurance pushback where they don't want to pay for the genetic testing for the two most common types, which is the MTHFR A and C genes. That gene, homozygous gene, is very common. Heterozygous means one copy. Homozygous means you're missing both copies, is very common. It prevented you from getting cholera, 600 years ago, but now it's not so helpful. But because you have that SNP, you need to take methylated B, so it's methylated B12, take some methylated folate with it. Folate is good for everything neurologic. We give it to pregnant moms so their kids don't develop neural tube defects, right? Methylfolate. It's not in prenatal vitamins, by the way. You have folic acid, which is not the right form.
No,
but
that's totally wrong.
That's a whole nother show. Another show. But for people with detoxification genetics errors or SNPs, they need to get their B vitamins in. It's in your food, but in your food may not be enough. Even organic, there is a nutrient decline because of our soil health. And so about 40%, we think, over the past decades, of nutrient density. So you can't even eat enough to get enough. Yes, please eat your nutrient-rich diet, but some of us may need more, especially if you have cognitive impairment. I suggest you up your supplements. Change your diet. Always change your diet. Never take supplements over dietary change, please. But because of the oxidative stresses caused by glyphosate and other things, and the oxidative stress on the brain, antioxidants, polyphenols, are key for helping people who have dementia.
Can you name?
And I want to put in here glyphosate again, because glyphosate disrupts the shikimate pathway, which is the source of the polyphenols. The polyphenols come out of the shikimate pathway, so they're actually going to be depleted in the plants because of glyphosate exposure. And also methionine. Glyphosate's been shown to interfere with the synthesis of methionine from inorganic sulfur by the gut microbes and by the plants. And so you're going to have a deficiency in methionine, which is the methyl that goes into the methyl tetrahydrofolate. So the MTHFR deficiency is going to disrupt your methylation pathways, but methionine is king. That's where that methyl group comes from. Methionine made by the gut microbes, and they can't do it well if they're being exposed to glyphosate.
Okay, so diet is very important. And when we're choosing our diet, I want to reiterate that not choosing canned foods and aluminum, especially tomato, what I hear, tomato products in canned foods would not be good, because the acid can pull out the aluminum. I don't have a study to show about that. That's just what I'm hearing about that. Do you agree with that, Dr. Perro? Getting tomato products in glass,
absolutely,
reducing aluminum exposure. And then
I would think carbonated drinks in cans too, right? Coca-Cola is going to strip off.
I don't like this new trend of kombucha in
terrible in cans.
Yeah, because it's going to pull out I believe it's going to be pulling out that aluminum and any other metals that might be in there. We had a question from Bonnie. What about stainless steel cookware? I also want to know about cast iron cookware. Those are, I would say, better options than aluminum, wouldn't you?
I like cast iron.
So a problem with the cast iron has to be an antique cast iron, the kind your grandmother had. The modern cast irons are a blend of metals. And when you cook on them, especially acid food like tomatoes,
Oh boy.
that's a common one. In
Glad
iron,
you told me that.
it pulls out the bad metals like LOG. I'm not picking on them, but that's a common one.
So
There
old
is
cast irons. Get your cast iron from a yard sale, folks.
it goes to yard sale, and it's
Garage
old
sale.
and rusted. You can retreat it in the
Retreat it, yeah.
oven.
Yeah,
You
it can become a source of iron, actually. You know, we have an iron
aluminum.
wok, and that works out really well to get iron in your food.
And so the all clad, the steel it can also leach. The only thing I found are the titanium steel based combos. That's why I use Salad Masters. There are other ones other than Salad Masters. I don't have their names in front of me. And I switched a year ago, and I'm in love with my new cookware because when I test people for heavy metals, they're high. We have to look where the heavy metals are coming from: your food, your water, the air, your cookware, your supplements. Supplements can have metals in them. Glyphosate Roundup is contaminated with heavy metals.
Yes.
Dr.
Go to Moms Across America. Go to momsacrossamerica.org, and in our blog section down on the right, type in arsenic and Roundup, and there's an article that quotes Dr.
heavy metals.
Right,
that's a Sterlini study, which I love him for that, and he's still fighting. By the way, he's a big ag. God bless that guy. So the cookware I'd recommend is I like titanium steel blends. It's expensive. Get it once, and a lot of those steel titanium ones are legacy cookware. They're guaranteed for life, and you can pass them on to your offspring.
Great.
And they get the guarantee. So your cookware is key, because I cook at least twice a day in my house, and I do most of the cooking. I mean, I don't eat out anymore, because eating out they don't use organic. They're using canola oil. They were using the oils. And since COVID, I find the food in restaurants has actually gotten worse, unfortunately.
Oh, sure, because they're trying to cut corners every way they can, because the prices have gone up, and they're using cheaper and cheaper oils. And even if they say olive oil, in a lot of places, there's canola oil in there. They're sneaking in, watering it down, honey. They're sneaking in corn syrup. You know, the ingredients have just been contaminated by other ingredients, and then also from glyphosate and heavy metals as well. Baby food also very high in heavy metals if you're not careful. Yeah, arsenic, cadmium.
I have to say one thing for our listeners, because I use zeolite. Zeolite is a naturally occurring substance found in a volcanic rock. It is aluminum. It's an aluminum silicate. Clinoptilite is the one we use clinically. You got to be careful of quality ones. Some of them are contaminated with heavy metals, but there's a lot of literature on they are useful in dementias and Alzheimer's. They bind the heavy metals. And there's one product I use called Clear Drops, which is water soluble, and we think it can cross the blood-brain barrier to pull it out. There are very few products I know that can get the aluminum out. You want it out. And so why we don't have all the Alzheimer's patients on zeolite, even the ones that may not be as good as Beyond Meat, they're affordable. And if you take the zeolites, hopefully it stays in the gut if the person doesn't have leaky gut. Almost everyone does now. Can be really helpful as binders, because they bind the metals. They can even bind mold. They can bind different substances and pull them out. And so you want binders: humic acid, fulvic acid, bentonite clay, charcoal. These are all binders, but zeolite is key for the metals. And this is something we're not giving medical advice here, folks. Please work with a practitioner if you're helping a loved one with dementia.
And I think we have an image for zeolite in the stomach, intestines, the body. Can we show that, please? The zeolite. Yes, thank you.
Yes. This is the zeolite. There's the clinoptilite. There's the micronized zeolite. There's the water-soluble zeolite. So it really behooves you to work with a practitioner. They're often integrative or holistic or functional medicine docs, all kinds. And thank you for showing the image.
And you mentioned also the humic acid and graphene. Do you want to talk about that at all, or?
Yeah, we want to get that graphene oxide out. Another toxic metal. I think we could spend 2 shows.
Okay, all right. That's actually another topic.
another topic, but you want that graphene out, and humic acid, you've got to make sure it's a clean humic acid and it's not contaminated. Definitely helps cows, can be shown to pull out graphene oxide. And I think we all
and
need
glyphosate. It's been used successfully on glyphosate, and actually it traps enzymes that are very versatile at breaking down various toxic chemicals. So that the humic acid actually has the enzymes in it that can help to break things down.
And
you want to get rid of.
There's some products on on Moms Across America.
Yes.
A good product for humic acid and fulvic acid.
Ion Biome, formerly known as Restorer, is sold on momsacrossamerica.org. We are a nonprofit, and this is a fundraiser for us. We do appreciate if you donate to Moms Across America and GMO Science, which is the host of the New MDs. And of course, get Stephanie's book, Toxic Legacy, and Michelle's book, What's Making Our Children Sick. Michelle, don't you have another book coming out soon?
Yes, March 2023, 24, not 23. Making Our Children Well. I'm writing it with a nutritionist. It's focused. It's a parent guidebook using nutrition and homeopathy.
Excellent.
Super simple. It's a how-to book and what to do. It's a what to do book.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank you for being on the show today and discussing this very important topic. We are all touched by Alzheimer's and dementia, unfortunately, in our families. And it is a very tragic and, as you said, stressful incidents in our lives. And it doesn't have to be quite so prevalent. And we can absolutely support people in reversing this by, raising awareness and having discussions like this and looking into, are the pharmaceuticals really the best first choice? We really invite people to look into other ways, like we just mentioned, diet, switching out the way that you purchase food, whether it's in aluminum cans or glass, what you're cooking in, of course, reducing your exposure to vaccines and aluminum in vaccines and aluminum in all kinds of things. So please do do the research on how you can, really just get big pharma out of your life as much as possible and bring in the natural remedies and nature and take care of your families in more holistic ways. And so we so appreciate, we have show notes that are just copious in the amount of studies. We didn't even get to talk about half of them, but if you do watch us on Facebook, YouTube, we may be on other channels as well. We will be putting the links of all of those studies in the bottom of the show notes, and you can look at the science yourself and determine for yourself what is best for your family. But we are the New MDs, moms, doctors, and scientists working together to heal our children. And we appreciate your input to work with us. What kind of shows do you want to see next? And what kind of science do you want to question, right? And have answers to? What kind of health issues do you want us to discuss? Thank you so much for being with us today on the New MDs. Thank you, Dr. Stephanie Seneff and Dr. Michelle Perro. We appreciate you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.